"We're going this evening, Mom. I've sold your lake house." Those were the exact words my daughter Melissa spoke to me over the phone that Tuesday morning. No warmth. No hesitation. No apology. Just those 10 words, sharp as glass, before she hung up. I stood frozen in my kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear, staring out at the maple trees swaying by the lake, our lake. That house wasn't just timber and stone. It was where Daniel taught Melissa to fish when she was 6. Where we hosted summer cookouts that stretched into starlit nights. Where 30 Christmases ended with us watching moonlight dance across frozen water. And my only daughter had just sold it. Without asking. Without even the courtesy of a conversation. But as the shock settled in my chest, something unexpected happened. Instead of tears, I felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. Because Melissa had made one critical mistake. She had no idea who her mother really was. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 68 years old. And until that phone call, I thought I knew my daughter. I had become a widow just 6 months ago. Daniel, my husband of 42 years, passed away last autumn after a long illness. Since then, Melissa had been so present in my life, or so I believed. She called regularly, 3 times a week like clockwork. She helped me sort through funeral arrangements and estate paperwork. She even insisted on handling the property documents herself. "Mom, lawyers are too expensive," she'd said with that smile I thought was love. But now I understood. It wasn't love. It was strategy. The lake house had been our sanctuary. Daniel and I bought it when Melissa was 15 with decades of hard work and sacrifice. Every summer we'd retreat there, birthdays, anniversaries, family gatherings. Melissa would bring boyfriends, then eventually her husband Connor. I'd cook for everyone, clean up after them, do the laundry. It was our tradition. Our history written in every floorboard. I never imagined she'd see it as nothing more than cash. When she hung up on me, I stayed there in that kitchen, gripping the counter, surrounded by the breakfast dishes Daniel and I had eaten from together 1,000 times. And for the first time in 6 months, I didn't cry. Something strange happened inside me. A clarity I hadn't felt since Daniel's death. Because in that moment, I remembered something I had completely forgotten. 3 days before Daniel died, he had handed me a small locked chest from his desk. His hands had trembled slightly, unusual for him, as he pressed it into mine. "Evelyn," he'd said, his voice serious in a way that made me pay attention, "put this somewhere safe. If something happens to me, open it only when you need to. You'll know when." I had tucked it away in his study without much thought. After the funeral, drowning in grief and arrangements and Melissa's helpful presence, I simply forgot. But there it was. Waiting for me upstairs. That afternoon, I went through the motions. I made tea. I straightened the living room. I even started a load of laundry, anything to keep my hands busy while my mind raced. Around 3 o'clock, I heard a car pull into my driveway. It was Melissa. With Connor. They didn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable. "Mom," Melissa said brightly, breezing through my front door like she owned the place, "we're leaving for Dubai tonight. Connor has a huge investment lined up there. We needed quick capital, so we sold the lake house. But don't worry, we deposited your share in your account. 30%. That's more than generous, really. My share. Of my own house. The house Daniel and I built memories in." I smiled faintly. "Safe travels, then." Melissa looked almost relieved I wasn't fighting her. Connor smirked behind her, already dismissing me from his thoughts. They left 20 minutes later, their suitcases loaded, their futures bright with my stolen property. I stood at the window and watched them drive away. And then I walked upstairs to Daniel's study, opened the bottom drawer of his oak desk, and lifted out the chest. My hands didn't tremble as I unlocked it. What I found inside changed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand what happened next, and why Melissa's betrayal was about to backfire in ways she never imagined, you need to know the full story. You need to know about Daniel's secrets, about the life we built in silence, and about the woman I used to be before grief made me forget my own strength. Let me start at the beginning. Now, before I begin, my family and friends, if this is your first time on this channel, please help subscribe to this channel, like the video, and comment where you are watching from and what time it is at your end. Thank you. Now let's begin. Daniel's study was exactly as he'd left it. I hadn't touched anything since the funeral, couldn't bring myself to pack away his books, his reading glasses still folded on the desk, the half-finished crossword puzzle from that last Sunday morning. The room still smelled like him, old leather, coffee, and that sandalwood cologne he'd worn for 40 years. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, my hand on the frame, remembering all the evenings I'd find him here. He'd be hunched over paperwork, his brow furrowed in concentration, and when he'd see me, his face would transform into that gentle smile that made me fall in love with him at 23. Just balancing the books, my love, he'd always say. I thought he meant our household budget. Our modest savings account. The checkbook we used to pay bills. How wrong I'd been. I walked slowly to his oak desk and ran my fingers across its worn surface. Daniel had bought this desk at an estate sale 30 years ago. Solid craftsmanship, he'd said, running his hands over the wood with the same reverence other men reserved for sports cars. This will outlast us both. He'd been right about the desk. Just not about himself. I remembered a conversation we'd had in this very room, maybe 2 years ago. Melissa had just visited for Christmas, and she'd spent the entire weekend talking about Connor's investment schemes, their plans to move up to a bigger house, their frustration that other people their age seemed so much more successful. After she left, Daniel had poured himself a whiskey, something he rarely did, and sat heavily in his chair. Evelyn, he'd said quietly, when did our daughter become so hungry for things she doesn't need? I'd tried to defend her. She's just ambitious, Daniel. There's nothing wrong with wanting a comfortable life. But he'd shaken his head slowly. Ambition is wanting to build something. What Melissa has, that's something else. That's a hole that can never be filled. I'd brushed off his concerns then, thought he was being too harsh. But Daniel had seen something in our daughter that I'd refused to acknowledge. He'd seen the coldness beneath her smiles, the calculation behind her affection. And he'd prepared for it. I knelt down and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. The chest was right where I'd left it 6 months ago, a simple wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, with a brass lock. On top of it lay a small key taped to a note card in Daniel's handwriting. Open only if Melissa betrays your trust. My hands trembled as I peeled away the tape and picked up the key. Part of me wanted to believe this was all a misunderstanding, that Melissa had just made a terrible mistake, that inside this box I'd find, what? A sentimental letter? Some old photographs? But I knew Daniel better than that. He never did anything without purpose. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The lid opened with a soft creak. Inside was a stack of documents, neatly organized with colored tabs. On top was a leather-bound journal with Daniel's initials embossed on the cover. I lifted it out with shaking hands and opened to the first page. My dearest Evelyn. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you, and our daughter has shown you who she truly is. I'm so sorry, my love. No parent should have to face this truth about their child. But I need you to know that you are not defenseless. You are not poor. And you are most certainly not alone. What I'm about to show you, I kept secret not out of dishonesty, but out of protection. Protection for you, and perhaps foolishly, protection for Melissa too. I didn't want money to change how she saw us, how she treated us. I wanted her to love us for who we were, not what we had. I see now that was naive. She would have found a way to show her true nature regardless. Everything in this chest is yours. Everything I built for us. Use it wisely, my love. Use it to protect yourself. And if you must, use it to teach our daughter the lesson I was too soft-hearted to teach her myself. Forever yours, Daniel. Tears blurred my vision as I read his familiar handwriting. Even in death, he was still protecting me, still thinking ahead, still being the steady presence that had anchored me for 42 years. I set the journal aside and began pulling out the documents. The first was a property deed for 3 cabins in the mountains, 2 hours north of the city. I'd never even known Daniel had been to those mountains, let alone bought property there. The second was ownership papers for a hunting lodge near the Canadian border. The third was a deed for 20 acres of pristine lakeshore property, not our lake house, but a different lake entirely. My hands moved faster now, pulling out document after document. Investment portfolios. Stock certificates. Bank statements for accounts I'd never heard of. A trust fund worth more money than Daniel had earned in his entire career as a civil engineer. And finally, at the very bottom, a property deed that made my breath catch in my throat. The lake house. Our lake house. But the deed wasn't in just Daniel's name, or even both our names as I'd always assumed. It was in the name of the Harper Family Trust, a trust established 30 years ago that listed me as the sole trustee and beneficiary. According to the attached legal documents, Melissa had never had any legal right to sell it. She'd forged paperwork, lied to the buyers, and committed outright fraud. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. According to these documents, the lake house was the least valuable property we owned. The cabins, the lodge, the lakeshore acreage, together, they were worth 10 times what the lake house was. Melissa thought she'd stripped me bare. She thought she'd taken everything Daniel and I had built together and left me with nothing but a widow's share. She had no idea she'd only scratched the surface. I sat back on my heels, surrounded by Daniel's secrets, and for the first time since his death, I felt something other than grief. I felt a spark of the woman I used to be, the woman who'd worked 2 jobs to put herself through college, who'd stood beside Daniel through every struggle and setback, who'd built a life from nothing. Daniel had given me back my power. Now I just had to decide what to do with it. I gathered all the documents carefully and placed them back in the chest, along with Daniel's journal. Then I carried the chest to my bedroom and locked it in my closet, behind the winter coats Melissa had always said I should throw away. Let her think she'd won. Let her enjoy her trip to Dubai, funded by stolen money from a fraudulent sale. She'd learned soon enough that betraying Evelyn Harper was the biggest mistake of her life. I had just finished locking the chest in my closet when I heard a car pull into the driveway. Through the bedroom window, I watched Melissa's silver SUV, the one she'd bought last year, complaining the entire time that it wasn't the luxury model she really wanted, parked behind my old Honda. She stepped out first, her designer sunglasses perched on her head, wearing clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Connor followed, checking his phone with that perpetual look of self-importance he wore like a second skin. He was wearing a suit, on a Tuesday afternoon, because Connor was the kind of man who thought expensive clothes made him impressive. They didn't look like people who'd just betrayed a grieving widow. They looked like they were heading to brunch. I took a slow breath and smoothed down my cardigan. In the mirror, I saw exactly what they expected to see, a tired old woman in comfortable clothes, gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, no makeup, still lost in grief. Perfect. I met them at the front door before they could knock. Mom. Melissa's voice was bright, cheerful even. She leaned in for a hug that I returned mechanically, breathing in her expensive perfume. We can't stay long, we have to be at the airport by 6, but we wanted to see you before we left. How thoughtful, I said, stepping back to let them in. Connor gave me a nod that was probably meant to pass as a greeting and immediately walked past me into the living room, his eyes already scanning the space like he was cataloging assets. I'd seen him do this before at family gatherings, mentally appraising everything, calculating value, always looking for an angle. Can I get you anything? I asked. Coffee? Tea? We're fine, Mom, Melissa said, settling onto the sofa that had been in this house for 20 years. She patted the cushion beside her, but I remained standing. We really can't stay long. Our flight leaves at 8, and you know how security is these days. Dubai, I said quietly. That's quite far. It is. Melissa's eyes lit up with that animated enthusiasm she used when she wanted something. But Mom, this opportunity is incredible. Connor's been working on it for months. Haven't you, honey? Connor looked up from his phone long enough to nod. It's a real estate development deal. High-end properties, massive returns. We're talking about tripling our investment in 18 months. Maybe even quadrupling, Melissa added, leaning forward. The Gulf market is booming right now. Everyone who's smart is investing there. I lowered myself into Daniel's old armchair, the one Melissa had been telling me for years I should replace, and folded my hands in my lap. It sounds very exciting. It is. Melissa practically bounced on the sofa. And Mom, this is going to change everything for us. Connor's finally going to get the recognition he deserves. We'll be able to move into that neighborhood we've been looking at, maybe even buy a vacation property in Europe. I'm happy for you, I said, and I was pleased at how steady my voice sounded. Connor finally set down his phone and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, in what I recognized as his serious business talk pose. Evelyn, I know the timing on the house sale was sudden. But opportunities like this don't wait. When we got the call from our Dubai contacts, we had 72 hours to commit the capital. 72 hours. We had no choice, Mom, Melissa chimed in, her voice taking on that wheedling tone she'd perfected as a teenager. The lake house was just sitting there, and honestly, when was the last time you even went there? After Dad died, I thought it would just make you sad. My fingers tightened on the armrests, but I kept my face neutral. You were thinking of my feelings. Exactly. Melissa seemed to take my words at face value, missing entirely the ice beneath them. I didn't want you dealing with the upkeep, the property taxes, all that stress. This way, you get a nice lump sum, and you don't have to worry about maintaining a second property you're not even using. Connor pulled out his phone again. I've already transferred your portion to your account. You should see it by tomorrow morning. 30% of the sale price, that's $127,000. Not bad for a property you weren't using, right? 30%. Of a house worth at least $450,000. They'd sold it fast and cheap, probably to some investor who saw an opportunity, and they were acting like they'd done me a favor by giving me a third of my own property's value. That's very generous, I said softly. Well, we wanted to make sure you were taken care of, Melissa said, reaching over to pat my hand. Her fingers were warm, her nails perfectly manicured. You're our family, Mom. We wouldn't just leave you with nothing. The irony of her words hung in the air like poison. Connor checked his watch, a Rolex, I noticed, that hadn't been on his wrist at Christmas. Babe, we should get moving. Traffic to the airport will be brutal. Melissa stood up, smoothing her designer jeans. You're going to be fine, Mom. The money we deposited will last you a good while if you're careful. And who knows? Maybe when we get back, we'll be rich enough to help you out even more. Help me out. Like I was a charity case. I walked them to the door, watched Melissa hug me one more time with that artificial warmth that I'd mistaken for love just this morning. Connor shook my hand with the grip of someone who thought firm handshakes proved character. We'll call you when we land, Melissa promised, already halfway to the car. Don't worry about us, okay? Everything's going to be amazing. I stood in the doorway and watched them load their expensive luggage into the SUV. 4 large suitcases for a 6-month trip. Melissa was laughing at something Connor said, her head thrown back, her whole body radiating excitement about a future funded by my stolen property. They pulled out of the driveway without looking back. Not a wave. Not a second glance. I closed the door and leaned against it, my calm facade finally cracking. My hands were shaking, not from fear or grief, but from rage. Pure, crystalline rage that I'd been suppressing for the last 30 minutes. I walked back upstairs to my bedroom, retrieved Daniel's journal from the chest, and carried it down to his study. I sat in his chair, opened the journal to the first page, and read his words again. Use it to teach our daughter the lesson I was too soft-hearted to teach her myself. I placed my hand flat on the page, feeling the indentations where Daniel's pen had pressed into the paper. Outside, the sun was setting over the lake, painting the water in shades of amber and gold. It was the same view Daniel and I had watched together countless times. "It's time for me to finish what you started, my love," I whispered to the empty room. And for the first time in 6 months, I smiled. The next morning, I dressed with more care than I had in months. Not the comfortable cardigans and elastic waist pants I'd been living in since the funeral, but the charcoal gray suit Daniel had always said made me look formidable. I pinned my hair up properly, applied makeup for the first time since the memorial service, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't the confused, grieving widow Melissa had taken advantage of. She was someone I'd almost forgotten existed, the woman who'd negotiated her first salary, who'd stood up to dismissive doctors when Daniel was sick, who'd built a life through sheer determination. "Welcome back, Evelyn." Mr. Lawson's office was downtown in one of those old buildings with marble floors and brass fixtures that spoke of stability and tradition. Daniel had worked with him for over 20 years, though I'd only met him a handful of times, at the reading of Daniel's will, and before that, at a few social functions. The receptionist, an elegant woman in her 50s, smiled warmly when I gave my name. "Mrs. Harper, Mr. Lawson is expecting you." He cleared his entire morning. That surprised me. I'd called yesterday evening and his secretary had simply said, "Come in tomorrow at 9. He'll make time." Mr. Lawson stood when I entered his office, coming around his massive mahogany desk to shake my hand. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing a 3-piece suit that had probably cost more than Melissa's SUV payment. "Evelyn," he said, his voice warm but professional. "I'm so glad you called. Please, sit down." I settled into one of the leather chairs across from his desk and placed the chest between us. "I found this in Daniel's study. He left instructions to open it if..." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "If certain circumstances arose." "I see." Mr. Lawson's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or confirmation of something he'd already suspected. "May I?" I nodded, and he opened the chest, pulling out the documents one by one. He studied each paper carefully, his experienced eyes moving quickly over the legal language. The silence stretched for several minutes, broken only by the rustle of paper and the distant sound of traffic below. Finally, he set down the last document and looked at me directly. "Evelyn, did you know about any of this?" "Not until yesterday," I admitted. "Daniel never told me." "About the properties, the investments, the trust, none of it." Mr. Lawson leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Your husband was one of the most meticulous men I've ever worked with. Every 6 months, he'd come in here with new documents to add to his estate plan. He'd update the trust, adjust the investment portfolio, acquire new properties. And every single time, he'd say the same thing, 'This is for Evelyn. Everything is for Evelyn. She just doesn't know it yet.'" My throat tightened. Why didn't he tell me? I asked him that once. Mr. Lawson's expression softened. "He said he wanted you to live without the weight of it. He said money changed people, changed relationships, and he wanted your life together to be about love, not assets. He wanted Melissa to love you both for who you were, not what you had." "Well, that worked out brilliantly," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "What's happened, Evelyn?" I told him everything. Melissa's phone call, the sale of the lake house, Connor's Dubai scheme, the casual cruelty of their visit yesterday. Mr. Lawson listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he pulled a legal pad toward him and began making notes. First things first, Melissa had absolutely no legal right to sell that property. The lake house, like everything else Daniel owned, is held in the Harper family trust. You are the sole trustee. Any sale would have required your explicit written consent and notarized authorization. So the sale is invalid? Completely. She either forged documents or the buyer's attorney was incompetent enough not to verify the chain of title properly. Either way, we can reverse this. He looked up at me. How do you want to proceed? We could have her arrested for fraud. The evidence is clear-cut. I thought about Melissa on that airplane right now, probably sipping champagne in business class, celebrating her theft with my money. Part of me wanted exactly what Mr. Lawson suggested, swift, legal justice. I wanted to see her face when the police explained what she'd done. But that wasn't enough. No, I said slowly. I don't want her arrested. Not yet. Mr. Lawson raised an eyebrow. May I ask why? Because if I have her arrested now, she'll just play the victim. She'll cry, apologize, blame Connor, claim she was confused about the paperwork. She'll never actually understand what she did wrong. I met his eyes. My husband built all of this to protect me. The least I can do is use it to teach our daughter the lesson he tried to teach her while he was alive. A slight smile crossed Mr. Lawson's face. What did you have in mind? I want you to reverse the sale quietly. Get the lake house back without Melissa knowing. And then I want you to help me take direct control of all these properties and assets. Daniel set this up to protect me from worry, but now I need to protect myself from my own daughter. That can certainly be arranged. He made more notes. What else? I thought about Daniel's journal, about his words. Use it to teach our daughter the lesson I was too soft-hearted to teach her myself. I want to wait, I said. I want Melissa to go to Dubai, invest in whatever scheme Connor has cooked up, and believe she's gotten away with betraying me. I want her to think I'm just a poor widow grateful for whatever scraps she threw my way. And then? And then, when the time is right, I want her to discover the truth. I want her to learn what she actually gave up when she chose money over family. I leaned forward. Can you do all of this without her finding out? Mr. Lawson was quiet for a moment, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then he nodded. Not only can I do it, Evelyn, but I think your husband would be very proud of you right now. How long will it take? To reverse the sale? 2 weeks, maybe 3. The buyers will get their money back, no questions asked. They'll never even know who the real owner was. He pulled out a calendar. Taking direct control of the trust and consolidating the assets, that's more complex. A month, perhaps 6 weeks. But when we're done, you'll have complete authority over everything Daniel built. I stood, feeling steadier than I had in months. Thank you, Mr. Lawson. He stood as well, extending his hand. Evelyn, one more thing. These properties and investments Daniel made, they're substantial. You're not just comfortable. You're wealthy. Very wealthy. The word felt strange. Foreign. Daniel and I had lived modestly our entire marriage. We'd driven old cars, clipped coupons, saved religiously. We'd been comfortable, yes, but wealthy? How wealthy? Mr. Lawson named a figure that made my knees weak. I had to sit back down. That can't be right. I assure you, it is. Your husband was an extraordinarily savvy investor. And he did it all for you. He paused. What you do with that wealth now is entirely up to you. But Evelyn? Don't let Melissa make you feel powerless. You're anything but. I left his office an hour later with a folder full of documents and a plan taking shape in my mind. On the street below, people rushed past, heading to jobs, running errands, living their ordinary lives. I looked like just another elderly woman in a gray suit. Nobody would guess I'd just learned I controlled an empire my daughter didn't even know existed. I pulled out my phone and looked at the last text from Melissa, sent from the airport, boarding now. Don't worry about me, Mom Redheart. I typed back, have a wonderful time, sweetheart. I love you. And I meant it. I did love her. But love didn't mean letting her destroy herself without consequences. I slipped the phone back into my purse and headed toward the bus stop. I still had my old Honda, but somehow taking the bus felt right. Let the neighbors see the poor widow using public transportation. Let them pity me. They had no idea who I really was. And neither did Melissa. Not yet. 3 weeks after Melissa and Connor left for Dubai, I was in the garden pruning roses when Aurora came rushing across the lawn with the breathless urgency of someone carrying scandal. Evelyn. Evelyn, have you heard? I set down my shears and straightened slowly, one hand on my lower back like the elderly widow I was supposed to be. Heard what, Aurora? About Connor. About the Dubai deal. She was practically vibrating with the thrill of bad news. My nephew works in international banking, and he said Connor's investment collapsed. The whole thing was a scam, some kind of Ponzi scheme. Everyone lost everything. I felt my heart skip, but I kept my face carefully neutral. Oh no. Are you sure? Completely sure. It's been all over the financial news. Some British developer was arrested for fraud, and apparently Connor was one of the biggest investors. Aurora leaned in closer, lowering her voice even though we were alone in my yard. They're saying he lost everything. Not just the investment money, but he'd taken out loans too. Big loans. How terrible, I murmured, and I meant it. Not for Connor, I felt nothing for Connor, but for what this meant for Melissa. Have you heard from her? Aurora asked, her eyes gleaming with curiosity masked as concern. Not in a few days. I'm sure she's fine. But she wasn't fine. I knew that even before my phone rang at 2 a.m, for days after Aurora's visit. I'd been lying awake, Daniel's journal open on the nightstand, when the phone screen lit up the darkness. Melissa's name. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Mom? Her voice was so small, so broken, that for a moment I almost forgot everything she'd done. She sounded like the little girl who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms, terrified and needing comfort. Melissa? What's wrong? It's the middle of the night. Mom, her voice cracked, and I heard her take a shuddering breath. Connor's gone. I sat up, turning on the bedside lamp. What do you mean, gone? He left me. The deal collapsed, and we lost everything, and there were all these debts I didn't know about, and he just left. He emptied our bank accounts and disappeared with some woman from the development company. I don't even know where he is. The words tumbled out in a rush, punctuated by sobs. I listened, my free hand gripping the blanket, torn between the satisfaction of seeing karma work and the genuine pain of hearing my daughter destroyed. Where are you now? I asked. Still in Dubai. At some terrible hotel near the airport. I can barely afford it. Mom, I have nothing. The credit cards are maxed out, the accounts are empty, and there are people here demanding money I don't have. Connor signed contracts in both our names. They're saying I'm liable for his debts. How much? Silence. Then, so quietly I almost couldn't hear, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I closed my eyes. Hundreds of thousands. Probably close to what they'd gotten from selling my lake house. I need to come home, Melissa said, her voice breaking completely. I know I don't deserve to ask, I know what I did was wrong, but Mom, please. I have nowhere else to go. Connor's family won't talk to me. My friends, they all disappeared when the money ran out. You're all I have left. There it was. The moment I'd been waiting for, though I'd never imagined it would come this quickly or this completely. Melissa, who'd discarded me like trash 3 weeks ago, was now begging me for refuge. I let the silence stretch, let her feel the weight of what she was asking. Mom? Are you still there? I'm here, I said finally. I'm just processing. I know I hurt you. I know selling the house was horrible. But I was so caught up in Connor's plans, in the idea of finally having the life I thought I deserved. She dissolved into tears again. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Was she sorry? Or was she just desperate? I thought about what Mr. Lawson had said, what you do with that wealth now is entirely up to you. I thought about Daniel's words, use it to teach our daughter the lesson I was too soft-hearted to teach her myself. And I thought about the lake house, already quietly returned to the trust, and the properties Melissa didn't know existed, and the life my daughter thought she destroyed but had barely touched. "Come home, Melissa," I said softly. "We'll figure this out together." "Really?" Hope bloomed in her voice, desperate and fragile. "You mean it? You're my daughter. This is your home." She sobbed with relief. "Thank you. Thank you, Mom. I'll book the cheapest flight I can find. I'll be there as soon as possible. Do you have enough for a ticket?" "Barely. I have one credit card that still works, but just barely." "Use it. Let me know when you land. I'll pick you up." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness for a long time, Daniel's journal in my lap. I opened it to a page I'd marked days earlier, where he'd written about Melissa's college graduation. "She has so much potential, but she's looking in all the wrong directions for fulfillment. I hope someday she learns that the best things in life can't be bought or sold. They can only be earned through character." "She's about to learn, my love," I whispered to the empty room. "One way or another, she's about to learn." 5 days later, I stood in the airport arrivals area, watching passengers stream through the gates. I spotted Melissa before she saw me. She looked like a ghost of herself. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by rumpled jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt. Her hair, usually styled perfectly, was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She'd lost weight, not the intentional, gym-sculpted weight loss she used to brag about, but the gaunt hollowness of someone who'd stopped eating from stress. Her eyes were swollen and red-rimmed, her face pale and drawn. She had 2 suitcases. Just 2. The same woman who'd loaded 4 massive bags into her SUV 3 weeks ago, laughing about her bright future. When she saw me, something in her face crumpled completely. She dropped her bags and ran to me like a child, throwing her arms around me and sobbing into my shoulder. "Mom. Oh God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I held her, feeling her shake with sobs, and I felt the weight of everything, the anger, the betrayal, the pain, but also the love that had never quite died despite everything she'd done. "Shoo," I murmured, stroking her hair the way I had when she was small. "It's okay. You're home now." We stood there in the middle of the busy airport, my daughter clinging to me like I was the only solid thing left in her world. Which, I suppose, I was. Around us, people rushed past with their own dramas, their own stories. No one looked twice at an old woman comforting her crying daughter. Finally, Melissa pulled back, wiping her eyes with trembling hands. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "No," I agreed quietly. "You don't. But you're going to earn it." She nodded, not understanding yet what that would mean. I picked up one of her suitcases, much lighter than I expected, and headed toward the exit. Melissa followed, dragging the other bag, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion and defeat. In the parking lot, she stopped when she saw my old Honda still parked in its spot. I thought we sold your car?" "Connor returned it," I lied smoothly. Apparently he felt guilty. Another lie Mr. Lawson had helped arrange. The truck was back in my garage, exactly where it belonged. Melissa just nodded, too broken to question anything. We drove home in silence. She stared out the window at the familiar streets, and I could see tears sliding down her cheeks. When we pulled into the driveway, she looked at the house she'd probably assumed I'd have to sell by now, with something like relief. I helped her with her bags, and we stood together in the doorway. She looked so small, so defeated, so utterly unlike the arrogant woman who'd breezed through the same door 3 weeks ago announcing her Dubai adventure. "Welcome home, Melissa," I said, putting my arm around her thin shoulders. She leaned into me, still crying softly. I looked over her bowed head at Daniel's study door down the hall, at the chest hidden in my closet, at all the secrets this house now held. "Let's see what you'll learn here." The first week, Melissa barely left her room. I'd hear her crying through the walls at night, long, broken sobs that reminded me of when she was 16 and her first boyfriend broke her heart. Back then, I'd gone to her, held her, promised her that everything would be okay. This time, I let her cry alone. During the day, she'd emerge like a ghost, pale, silent, moving through the house as if afraid to take up too much space. She'd make herself toast, eat it standing at the counter, then disappear back upstairs. She didn't ask about my finances, didn't question how I was affording groceries, didn't seem to notice that the house she'd expected me to lose was still fully mine. She was too lost in her own devastation to notice anything at all. By the second week, something started to shift. I came downstairs one morning to find Melissa in the kitchen, actually cooking. Scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, a full breakfast spread across the counter. "I thought you might be hungry," she said quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. "I know I haven't been. I haven't been helpful since I got back." I sat down at the table, the same table where she'd casually announced selling my house, and watched her plate the food with shaking hands. "Thank you," I said simply. We ate in silence. The eggs were slightly runny, the bacon a bit overdone. Melissa had never been much of a cook, she'd always preferred restaurants, takeout, anything that didn't require effort. But she'd tried, and something about that effort mattered. "Mom," she said finally, pushing her food around her plate, "I need to find a job. I can't just live here doing nothing." "What kind of job are you thinking?" She laughed bitterly. "Anything that will hire me. I have a degree in marketing that I haven't used in 5 years. No recent work experience. And if any employer does a background check." She trailed off, and I knew she was thinking about the debts, the fraud charges Connor might have implicated her in. "The library is hiring," I said casually. "I saw a notice at the branch last week. Part-time position, shelving books and helping at the desk." "The library?" Melissa looked up, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Pride, maybe, or the ghost of the woman who'd thought herself destined for so much more. But then it died, replaced by resignation. "Okay. Yes. I'll apply tomorrow." And she did. 3 weeks into Melissa's return, I was living 2 completely different lives. To the neighborhood, I remained the struggling widow. I took the bus to the grocery store even though my Honda sat in the garage. I clipped coupons at the kitchen table where Melissa could see them. I wore the same rotation of modest clothes, bought nothing new, and graciously accepted Aurora's offers of leftover casseroles. "You're so brave, Evelyn," Aurora told me one afternoon, catching me as I walked home from the bus stop. "Taking Melissa in after what she did. You're a saint." "She's my daughter," I said simply, which was both true and the perfect response to maintain my image. But in secret, I was someone else entirely. Twice a week, I'd tell Melissa I was visiting a grief support group at the church. Instead, I'd meet Mr. Lawson at his office or at the properties Daniel had left me. We'd tour the mountain cabins, discuss rental strategies for the lodge, review investment portfolios that grew larger every month. "The lakeshore property has appreciated 30% since Daniel bought it," Mr. Lawson told me during one visit. "You could sell it for substantial profit, or develop it yourself." I stood on that pristine stretch of land, watching sunlight dance on water, and thought about Daniel. He'd chosen each property so carefully, had built this empire one strategic purchase at a time. Not yet, I decided. I want to understand everything first. Every property, every investment, every decision he made. Mr. Lawson smiled. "You're thinking like him now." Maybe I was. Or maybe I was just finally becoming the woman I should have been all along, instead of the one who'd stood aside and let others make decisions. At home, Melissa was transforming too, though I watched her progress with cautious skepticism. She got the library job and threw herself into it with surprising dedication. She'd leave early, come home tired but with a strange kind of peace on her face. "I helped a little boy find a book about dinosaurs today," she told me one evening as we did dishes together, another new development. He was so excited when I showed him the whole section. He hugged me, "Mom." Just out of pure joy over books. I glanced at her. Her face was softer than I'd seen it in years, no makeup, her hair in a simple ponytail. She looked younger somehow. More like the daughter I remembered from long ago. "That sounds nice," I said. It was. She scrubbed at a plate thoughtfully. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Making someone happy without wanting something in return. Was she changing? Or was this just survival mode, playing the humble daughter until she could figure out her next move? I couldn't tell yet. So I watched. And waited. One Saturday morning, I found Melissa in the living room, staring at the family photos on the wall. She was looking at one from her childhood, all three of us at the lake house, Melissa maybe 8 years old, holding up a fish Daniel had helped her catch. "I remember that day," she said softly when she noticed me watching. "Dad was so patient, teaching me to cast the line. It must have taken 2 hours before I caught anything." 3 hours, I corrected. But he never complained. "I loved that house." Her voice cracked. "I loved it, and I sold it like it meant nothing. What's wrong with me, Mom? When did I become someone who could do that?" This was the question I'd been waiting for. The moment of self-awareness that might indicate genuine change. I sat down on the sofa. "I think you got lost, Melissa. Somewhere along the way, you started measuring your worth by what you owned instead of who you were." "Connor made it worse," she said, still staring at the photo. "He was always pushing for more, bigger, better. I thought that's what success looked like. And now?" She turned to face me, her eyes red-rimmed. "Now I'm 28 years old, living with my mother, working part-time at a library for minimum wage, and I've never been more ashamed of myself. But also..." She paused, searching for words. "Also, I feel more honest than I have in years. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," I said softly. What I didn't say was that I was still waiting. Waiting to see if this humility would last. Waiting to see if my daughter was truly learning or just performing contrition. That evening, Melissa commented on something that made my heart skip. "Mom, how are you managing? I mean, financially?" She was folding laundry, her clothes and mine mixed together, another sign of her changed circumstances. The house, the utilities, groceries, and now feeding me too. "I'm trying to contribute, but my paycheck barely covers anything." I kept my voice steady. "Your father was more careful with money than I realized. He left me enough to get by. But the lake house money, you only got 30%, and even that wasn't much because Connor sold it so cheap." She shook her head. "I can't believe I let him do that. Your house, and I just..." "It's done, Melissa. We can't change the past." She looked at me with confusion and something else. Suspicion? Curiosity? "You seem different lately, Mom. Stronger, somehow. Like you're not as worried as you should be." My pulse quickened. Had I been too obvious? Had she noticed the new confidence in my posture, the way I no longer jumped at every unexpected expense? "Grief changes you," I said, which was true enough. "You either let it destroy you, or you find strength you didn't know you had." Melissa nodded slowly, but I could see her mind working, questioning. I'd have to be more careful. That night, I called Mr. Lawson from Daniel's study with the door locked. "How much longer until everything is finalized?" I asked. "Another 2 weeks for the final documents. Then you'll have complete, uncontestable control of everything." He paused. "How is Melissa doing? Changing? Or pretending to change? I can't tell which yet. What will you do when she finds out the truth?" I looked at Daniel's journal on the desk, at the photo of the three of us that sat beside it. "That depends on who she's become by then," I said. "If she's learned what really matters, maybe she deserves to know. If she hasn't, then what? Then she'll learn the hardest lesson of all, that some betrayals cost more than money. They cost family. And that can never be bought back." 6 weeks after Melissa's return, I found her at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, surrounded by papers, her head in her hands. Melissa? What's wrong? She looked up, her face streaked with tears. I got a letter from a law firm in Dubai. They're saying I'm liable for Connor's debts. They want $340,000, Mom. $340,000. Her voice rose with panic. I don't have that. I'll never have that. They're going to sue me, maybe even try to extradite me. I could go to jail. I sat down across from her, my heart pounding. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for, though the timing was Mr. Lawson's doing, not mine. He'd mentioned that legal pressure from Dubai would eventually surface. Let me see, I said, taking the letter. I scanned it quickly, official letterhead, legal jargon, threats of action. Real enough to terrify Melissa, though Mr. Lawson had assured me her actual liability was questionable. I'm so sorry, Melissa sobbed. This is my mess, not yours. I'll figure something out. Maybe I can get a lawyer, or... I know a lawyer, I said quietly. Mr. Lawson. He handled your father's estate. Maybe he can at least tell you what your options are. Could he see me? I can't pay him, Mom. I have $247 in my bank account. Let me call him tomorrow. I'm sure we can work something out. The relief on her face was painful to watch. She still had no idea. 3 days later, we sat in Mr. Lawson's waiting room. Melissa's leg bounced nervously, her hands twisted in her lap. She dressed in the most professional clothes she still owned, a blouse I recognized from years ago and slacks that hung loose on her now thin frame. Thank you for doing this, Mom, she whispered. I know you probably can't afford his fees either, but just getting advice. Miss Harper, the receptionist interrupted. Mr. Lawson will see you now. Melissa stood on shaking legs. I followed her into the office where Mr. Lawson waited behind his massive desk, 2 thick folders placed precisely in front of him. Melissa, he said warmly, standing to shake her hand. It's good to see you again, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Please, sit. We settled into the leather chairs. Melissa perched on the edge of hers, her whole body tense. Your mother explained your situation, Mr. Lawson began, opening the first folder. I've taken the liberty of investigating the claims against you. May I be frank? Please, Melissa whispered. Connor Ferguson forged your signature on multiple documents. The debts he accumulated were in a company name that fraudulently listed you as a co-director without your knowledge or consent. I have evidence here, he tapped the folder, that proves you were a victim of his schemes, not a co-conspirator. Melissa's hand flew to her mouth. What? But the lawyers said. The lawyers in Dubai are working for the creditors, not you. They're hoping you'll panic and somehow produce money you don't have. But legally, you're not liable. He slid a document across the desk. This is a statement from the Dubai authorities. Connor is wanted for fraud in 3 countries. You're listed as a witness, not a suspect. I'm not going to jail. Her voice was so small, so broken. No, Melissa. You're not going to jail. The creditors may continue to harass you, but I'll send them a cease and desist letter that should end that. You're free. She collapsed back in her chair, sobbing with relief. Thank you. Oh God, thank you. I don't know how I'll ever pay you for this. We'll discuss my fees later, Mr. Lawson said, glancing at me. But first, there's something else we need to address. His tone changed, became more formal. Melissa looked up, confused. Something else? Mr. Lawson opened the second folder. This concerns your father's estate. Dad's estate? Melissa wiped her eyes. But that was settled months ago. There was just the house and some savings, and Mom got everything. That's how it should be. That's what you were told, Mr. Lawson said carefully. But the reality is considerably more complex. He pulled out document after document, laying them across the desk like cards in a poker game. Property deeds. Investment statements. Trust documents. Melissa stared at them, not understanding. What is all this? This, Mr. Lawson said, is your father's actual estate. The Harper Family Trust, established 30 years ago, of which your mother is the sole trustee and beneficiary. I watched Melissa's face as comprehension slowly dawned. She picked up a deed, read it, set it down with trembling hands. Picked up another. The mountain cabins, Mr. Lawson continued. The hunting lodge. 20 acres of premium lakeshore property. An investment portfolio worth approximately $2.3 million. And this, he tapped one particular deed, the lake house. Which your mother never actually lost, because the sale you arranged was fraudulent and has been quietly reversed. The color drained from Melissa's face. What? The lake house is still your mother's property. It always was. You had no legal right to sell it. Mr. Harper ensured that all major assets were protected in a trust that only your mother could access. Melissa turned to me, her eyes wide with shock. You have the lake house? Still? Yes, I said quietly. And these other properties? This money? Her voice was rising. You've had all of this the whole time? Yes. She stood up abruptly, knocking her chair backward. The whole time? While I was terrified in Dubai, while I came home broken and ashamed, while I'd been working at the library for minimum wage and crying myself to sleep every night, you've been rich? Melissa. You let me suffer. She was shouting now, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. You watched me fall apart, watched me humble myself, let me think we were both barely scraping by, and you had millions of dollars the entire time? Yes, I said again, my voice steady. I did. How could you? She grabbed the edge of the desk like she might collapse. I'm your daughter. How could you just watch me go through that and not? She choked on her words. You let me think I'd destroyed you. You let me think I'd ruined everything. You tried to, I said, and my voice was harder now. You sold my house without permission. You stole from me. You discarded me like garbage because Connor had a get-rich-quick scheme, and you didn't even have the decency to ask if I'd be okay. I know. Tears streamed down her face. I know what I did was horrible, and I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Are you sorry because you hurt me? Or are you sorry because you got caught? The question hung in the air like a blade. Melissa sank into her chair, her face in her hands, her whole body shaking. When she finally looked up, her eyes were devastated. Both, she whispered. God help me, at first it was just because I got caught. Because Connor left me and everything fell apart. I was sorry for myself, not for you. She took a shuddering breath. But these last 6 weeks, living with you, watching you be kind to me when I deserved nothing, seeing how you live with so little and never complain, I started to feel real shame. Not just fear, but actual shame for what I'd done to you. Do you understand why I didn't tell you? I asked. Why I let you believe we were both struggling? To punish me. To teach you, I corrected. There's a difference. You spent years measuring your worth by what you owned, who you could impress, how much you could accumulate. You looked at me and saw a poor old widow worth 30% of a fraudulent sale. You needed to learn what actually matters. Melissa was crying so hard now she could barely speak. What matters? Character. Integrity. Love that isn't conditional on bank accounts. I leaned forward. You've been working at that library for 6 weeks. You come home tired but content. You help with chores without being asked. You've started actually talking to me instead of at me. For the first time in years, I've seen glimpses of the daughter I raised, the one who existed before you started believing that money equals worth. I've been so stupid, she sobbed. So shallow and stupid and cruel. Yes, I agreed. You have been. She flinched like I'd slapped her. But, I continued, you've also been learning. Growing. Becoming someone your father would recognize again. I pulled Daniel's journal from my purse and set it on the desk. He knew this might happen. He wrote about it, warned about it. He built this protection for me because he saw something in you that worried him. Melissa reached for the journal with trembling hands, opened it, and read Daniel's familiar handwriting. With each page, she crumbled more, until she was sobbing so hard that Mr. Lawson quietly pushed a box of tissues across the desk. Dad knew, she whispered. He knew I was becoming someone terrible, and he still loved me enough to protect Mom from me. He loved you, I said. We both do. But love doesn't mean enabling self-destruction. Melissa set down the journal and looked at me with raw, honest eyes. What happens now? That depends on you, I said. What do you want to happen? She was quiet for a long moment, wiping her face, breathing deeply. Finally, she spoke. I want to keep my job at the library. I want to keep living simply. I want to earn back your trust, even if it takes years. She looked at the documents spread across the desk. This money, these properties, they're not mine. I don't deserve them. I don't even want them. I just want my mother back. The one I threw away for nothing. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed her. For months after the revelation in Mr. Lawson's office, I stood at my kitchen window watching Melissa load her Honda, my old Honda, which she'd asked to borrow, with boxes of donated books. The shelter kids are going to love these, she called out, catching me watching. Her face was bright, animated in a way I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. Mrs. Chen at the library was going to throw them out, but I figured why waste them? That's thoughtful, I said, and I meant it. She'd kept her word. All of it. After learning the truth about Daniel's estate, Melissa could have quit her library job, could have asked for access to the money, could have slipped back into the comfortable life she'd once craved. Instead, she'd doubled down on the person she was becoming. I need to finish this, she'd told me the week after the lawyer's office. Not the punishment part. I know you weren't trying to punish me, Mom. But the learning part. I need to know who I am without money defining me. So she'd kept her part-time position at the library, picking up extra shifts when they were available. She'd moved from my guest room into the small apartment above Mrs. Peterson's garage, tiny, drafty, but hers. She paid rent from her own paychecks and refused any financial help. I need to do this myself, she'd said firmly. I need to know I can. And she was doing it. More than that, she was thriving. 3 times a week, Melissa volunteered at the Lakeshore Women's Shelter, a place I'd only recently learned existed. It was housed in a converted church building near the water, providing temporary housing for women escaping domestic violence or financial crisis. You should come with me sometime, Melissa suggested one Saturday morning over breakfast. Meet the women I'd been working with. So I did. The shelter was warm and welcoming despite its humble means. Women of all ages moved through the common areas, some with children, some alone, all carrying the weight of difficult circumstances. I watched Melissa move among them with easy confidence, greeting them by name, asking about job interviews and court dates and kids' school projects. This is my mom, she introduced me to a young woman named Sarah who couldn't have been more than 25. Mom, Sarah just got hired at the grocery store. Her first real paycheck in 2 years. Melissa helped me practice for the interview, Sarah said, her eyes shining. She even drove me there because my car died. In that old Honda? I asked. It gets us where we need to go, Melissa said, and there was pride in her voice. Not the shallow pride of expensive things, but the deeper pride of genuine accomplishment. Later, as we sat in the shelter's small kitchen having coffee with the director, a woman named Patricia, I learned more about Melissa's involvement. Your daughter has been a godsend, Patricia said. She started by just reading to the kids, but now she's helping women with resume writing, job searches, even financial literacy workshops. She's honest with them about her own mistakes, and they respect that. Financial literacy? I raised an eyebrow at Melissa. She had the grace to look embarrassed. I figured if I could learn from my disasters, maybe I could help others avoid the same mistakes. I'm not exactly qualified, but I know what not to do, which is something. On the drive home, Melissa was quiet, thoughtful. Those women, she said finally, some of them have been through things that make my problems look like nothing. And they're still fighting, still trying to build better lives for themselves and their kids. It puts things in perspective. It's good work you're doing, I said. It's good work they're letting me be part of, she corrected. 6 months after the revelation, Melissa asked if we could take a drive together. She wouldn't tell me where, just said it was important. We headed north, and I realized where we were going before she said anything. The lake house. We hadn't been there together since before Daniel's death. I'd visited it several times with Mr. Lawson to assess its condition after the fraudulent sale was reversed, but Melissa hadn't asked to see it. I'd wondered if she was ashamed to face it. Now, as we pulled into the gravel driveway, I watched her face carefully. She sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the cream-colored house with its wraparound porch and view of the water. I used to dream about this place, she said quietly. After I sold it, I'd wake up in Dubai and remember the sound of the waves, the smell of Dad's morning coffee on the porch. And I'd feel sick knowing what I'd done. We got out of the car and walked toward the house. I unlocked the door, Mr. Lawson had provided me with new keys, and we stepped inside. Everything was exactly as Daniel and I had left it. The furniture we'd collected over decades. The photos on the walls of family summers. The kitchen where I'd cooked countless meals. The living room where Melissa had played board games as a child while rain drummed on the roof. Melissa moved through the rooms like she was walking through a memory, touching things gently, the dining table, the stone fireplace, the window seat where she used to read. I sold this house because I thought it was just property, she said, standing at the window overlooking the lake. Just an asset to convert into cash. I didn't see it as the place where Dad taught me to fish, or where you and I made Christmas cookies, or where I felt safe and loved for the first 20 years of my life. She turned to face me, tears streaming down her face. Now I know, it's not property. It's legacy. It's every moment of love and patience you and Dad poured into raising me. And I tried to sell that for a business deal that didn't even exist. I walked over and stood beside her, both of us looking out at the water sparkling in the afternoon sun. Your father bought this place when you were 15, I said. We could barely afford it, but he insisted. He said every family needs a place where they can just be together, without the noise of the world intruding. He called it our sanctuary. It was, Melissa whispered. It is. We stood in silence for a while, and then Melissa took a deep breath. Mom, I have an idea. Something I've been thinking about for weeks. She gestured around the house. What if we didn't keep this just for us? What if we used it, really used it, to help people? What do you mean? The shelter is always overcrowded. Women and kids living in rooms meant for half as many people. But this place, she looked around, it has 5 bedrooms. What if we turned it into a transitional house? A place where women from the shelter could stay for a few months while they get on their feet, somewhere peaceful where their kids could play outside and feel safe. I studied my daughter's face, seeing the passion there, the genuine desire to transform something she'd once destroyed into something meaningful. And the cabins? I asked. The lodge? What about those? Her eyes widened. You'd consider using those too? Your father didn't build an empire just to have it sit empty. Tell me what you're thinking. The words poured out of her then, months of ideas she'd been developing. The mountain cabins could become weekend retreats for families in crisis, places where they could breathe and heal. The lodge could host summer programs for at-risk youth. The lakeshore property could be developed into affordable housing for women transitioning out of shelters. We could create something that actually matters, she said, her voice intense. Not just charity, real programs that give people tools and time and space to rebuild their lives. Dad spent decades building these assets. What if we spent the rest of our lives making them count for something more than just net worth? I felt tears pricking my eyes. This was the daughter Daniel had hoped for. This was the woman Melissa was capable of being. He would be so proud of you, I said softly. He'd be proud of us, she corrected. If we do this together. I looked around the lake house, at the photos on the walls, at the space that held so many memories. Daniel's voice seemed to echo through the rooms. Every family needs a place where they can just be together. What if that family became bigger than just us? Let's do it, I said. Let's turn your father's legacy into something that changes lives. Melissa hugged me then, really hugged me, the way she used to when she was small and I was her whole world. I'm sorry it took losing everything to find what actually matters, she whispered. Sometimes that's the only way we learn, I said, holding my daughter close. Outside, the lake sparkled in the sunlight, and somewhere, I felt Daniel smiling. 1 year after that phone call that changed everything, I stood on the porch of the lake house watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and rose. Inside, I could hear the sounds of life, children's laughter, women's voices, the clatter of breakfast being made in the kitchen that had once been only mine and Daniel's. The house had been transformed, though not in ways visible to the eye. The furniture was the same, the photos still hung on the walls, but now it breathed with new purpose. 3 families currently called it home, temporary refuge while they rebuilt their lives after violence, addiction, financial collapse. The stories varied, but the need was always the same, a safe place to heal, to plan, to become whole again. Mom? Melissa appeared beside me, 2 mugs of coffee in her hands. She handed me one and leaned against the porch railing. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind. Good thoughts or bad thoughts? Grateful thoughts, I said, and I meant it. Melissa had just completed her first semester of graduate school, studying social work at the State University. Twice a week, she drove the 2 hours from campus to help at the lake house and the other properties we'd opened. The rest of the time, she studied with a ferocity that reminded me of Daniel when he was working on a difficult engineering problem, determined, focused, unwilling to quit until he understood. I got my grades yesterday, she said, a shy smile crossing her face. All A's. Melissa, that's wonderful. Dr. Patterson, my professor, said she wants me to consider specializing in trauma recovery work. She thinks I have unique insight into personal transformation. Melissa laughed softly. That's one way to put it. It's the truth, I said. You've lived it. We stood in comfortable silence, sipping our coffee as the sun climbed higher. A year ago, silence between us had been heavy with resentment and unspoken hurt. Now it was peaceful, the silence of 2 people who'd walked through fire together and emerged changed. The foundation meeting is at 10, Melissa reminded me. Are you ready for the presentation? The Daniel Harper Foundation had officially launched 6 months ago. What had started as a simple idea, use Daniel's properties to help struggling families, had grown into something much larger. We'd established scholarships for single mothers returning to school, job training programs, financial literacy workshops, and a network of transitional housing across 3 counties. Mr. Lawson served as our legal counsel. Patricia from the shelter had become our program director. And Melissa, despite being a full-time student, somehow found time to coordinate volunteers and mentor the women who came through our programs. As ready as I'll ever be, I said. Asking people for money still feels strange. You're not asking for money. You're inviting them to be part of something that matters. Melissa squeezed my shoulder. Dad would be terrible at fundraising too. He'd probably just show them spreadsheets of investment returns and expect that to be inspiring. I laughed because she was right. Daniel had been brilliant with numbers, careful with planning, but he'd never been comfortable asking for help. He'd built his empire alone, in silence, trusting no one with his strategies. We were doing things differently. We were building in community, with transparency, inviting others to join the work. And it was working in ways Daniel's solitary approach never could have. The foundation meeting was held at a community center downtown. 50 people attended, local business owners, church leaders, a few journalists, and several women who'd been through our programs and wanted to give back. I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, and felt a familiar flutter of nervousness. public speaking had never been my strength. But Melissa sat in the front row, giving me an encouraging nod, and I found my voice. My husband Daniel spent 40 years quietly building something he thought was just for me, I began. He bought properties, made investments, created trusts, all to ensure I'd be taken care of after he was gone. And I was. I am. But about a year ago, I realized something: being taken care of isn't the same as having a purpose. I told them about Daniel's wisdom, about his warnings that money could change people. I didn't mention Melissa's betrayal directly, that was her story to tell if she chose. But I spoke about loss, about lessons learned the hard way, about discovering that wealth means nothing if it's hoarded rather than shared. The Daniel Harper Foundation exists because my husband believed in preparation and protection, I continued. But it thrives because we believe in something more: transformation and community. We're not interested in temporary fixes. We want to give people the tools, time, and support to rebuild their lives with dignity. I spoke about our programs, showed photos of the lake house now bustling with families, shared testimonials from women who'd found their footing again. And then I introduced Melissa. My daughter has been the heart of this work, I said. She understands, perhaps better than anyone, what it means to lose everything and have to rebuild from nothing. Melissa? She stood and walked to the podium, and I saw confidence in her stride that hadn't been there a year ago. Not the false confidence of someone trying to impress, but the real confidence of someone who knew her own worth. A year ago, I made the worst mistake of my life, Melissa began, her voice steady. I betrayed someone I loved for money I didn't need, chasing a dream that was never real. I lost everything: my marriage, my home, my self-respect. But in losing everything, I found something I'd been missing my whole life: purpose. She spoke about her journey, about learning to find value in service rather than possessions, about the women at the shelter who'd taught her what real strength looked like. She spoke about her father's legacy and her mother's grace. My mom could have left me in the ruins I created, Melissa said, looking directly at me. Instead, she let me learn, let me grow, and then invited me to be part of something bigger than myself. That's what this foundation does. We don't just rescue people, we walk with them while they rescue themselves. By the time she finished, several people were wiping their eyes. The donations came in steadily, not just money, but offers of time, expertise, resources. A local contractor volunteered to renovate the mountain cabins. A retired teacher offered to tutor shelter children. A restaurant owner committed to providing job training and employment. This was what Daniel's empire had been building toward, even if he hadn't known it. Not just security for one widow, but transformation for an entire community. That evening, Melissa and I returned to the lake house. The families who lived there were gathered in the living room, the children playing a board game while the mothers talked quietly, planning their next steps. We slipped past them to the porch where Daniel and I had spent so many evenings together. We did it, I whispered to the sky, to the lake, to wherever Daniel was now. She finally understands. Did you say something? Melissa asked, joining me. Just talking to your father. What did he say back? I smiled. That he's proud of us. That this is what he hoped for, even if he couldn't have predicted how we'd get here. Melissa leaned her head on my shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. I was thinking about something today. About how Dad hid all that wealth to protect you, but also to protect me from becoming someone shallow and greedy. And I became that person anyway. The very thing he feared. She paused. But maybe that was necessary. Maybe I had to become that person and lose everything to understand what actually matters. Your father used to say that some lessons can't be taught, they have to be lived. He was right. Melissa straightened up, looking at the house behind us, now filled with women and children finding their way forward. This house, I once sold it because I thought it was just property, just something to convert into cash. Now I know it's so much more. What is it now? I asked, though I thought I knew the answer. It's legacy, Melissa said. Not just ours, but everyone's who walks through its doors. Every woman who finds safety here, every child who laughs on this porch, every person who gets a second chance, they're all part of what this house means now. Inside, one of the children squealed with delight at winning the game. Her mother laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy. A year ago, they'd had nothing. Now they had time, safety, and hope. Your father built this house to be a sanctuary for our family, I said. Now it's a sanctuary for many families. That's better, isn't it? Melissa asked. Better than it just sitting empty or being sold to strangers? Much better. We stood together as the sun set, mother and daughter, no longer divided by betrayal and secrets, but united in purpose. The lake reflected the darkening sky, and I thought about all the reflections I'd seen in that water, young Melissa learning to fish, Daniel's smile on lazy summer afternoons, my own grief-stricken face in the months after he died. Now I saw something new, possibility. Mom? Melissa said softly. Thank you. For not giving up on me. For teaching me the hardest lesson I ever needed to learn. What lesson was that? That some houses aren't just homes, they're lessons. And the best legacies aren't what we own, but what we give away. I took my daughter's hand and squeezed it gently. Behind us, the house that had witnessed so much, love, betrayal, loss, and redemption, glowed with warm light and the sounds of life beginning again. Daniel had built it as a sanctuary. I had reclaimed it as justice. And together, Melissa and I had transformed it into hope. Some houses aren't just homes, they're lessons. And this one had finally taught us both what we needed to know. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.